Babyn Yar became a symbol for the million of Jews shot to death by German units and local death squads. In this panel, we will deal with the complexity of conducting research on the matter, given the lack of historical evidence, together with new sources of knowledge, and also discuss Holocaust education for the younger generations. The speakers in our first panel are Professor Michael Berenbaum, the director of Sigi Ziering Institute in the American Jewish University, Mr. Boris Maftsir, a documentary filmmaker and founder of the project Searching for the Unknown Holocaust, and Professor Renée A. Middleton, the Dean of Patton College of Education from Ohio University. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
So let's start with you, Professor Berenbaum. The execution of Jewish communities started shortly after World War II. After the World War II Eastern Front was opened on June 1941. Could you briefly describe the background, the conditions, and the processes in the Soviet Union territories post their defeat to the German, before their defeat, army that led to this outcome?
Well, let's begin very simply that in 1939, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany signed a non-aggression pact. That essentially allowed for the bifurcation, for the division of Poland. And the Germans invaded from the west, the Soviet Union invaded from the east, and Poland was divided. Most historians believe that it was the plan of Hitler all along to attack the Soviet Union, and getting essentially free entree into Poland, or relatively free entree into Poland, was the way in which he could go about it. In Poland, the Jews were ghettoized, and then on June 22nd, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, and it began to capture large territories in the Soviet Union. It got to the edge of Moscow, and there was a very quick and very near total conquest. The problem for the Germans militarily was essentially that they were unprepared for the winter. They expected an immediate victory and immediate surrender, and they misjudged the ability of the Soviet Union and Soviet citizens, non-citizens even, to respond to this with toughness. Alongside the German troops, the Nazis sent in 3,000 Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units, whose task was to go to cities, villages, and hamlets, town by town, village by village, and round up the people, and to shoot them one by one by one. This was a process in which they depended upon local gendarmerie, native anti-Semites, armies that were allied with the Soviet Union, and in certain areas that were conquered, the bulk of the killing was not done by German troops, but was done by locals. So in Estonia, not one Jew was killed by a German, they were all killed by Estonians. In Lithuania, 2/3 of the Jewish community was annihilated, was murdered. I don't want to use exterminated. And in this case, the killing was personal. They were killed by Lithuanians, not by Germans, because the Germans were quite able to get Lithuanians to do their dirty task. We call it essentially the theory of double occupation and essentially of double collaboration, which is that the people who worked with the Soviet Union showed their allegiance to the German conquest by all of a sudden doing the dirty work for the Germans. Let me say three things very quickly. This was personal killing, face to face. It occurred in proximity to their homes. There was a process of confiscation of property and rewards for the local population who could take over this property. Mobile property was shipped back to Germany. It was personal, it was individual, and it was collective. It occurred in full view, as it were, of the general population.
And how many Jews do the historians estimate today were killed or annihilated, murdered during this process?
Well, in Estonia, the Jewish population was small. The entire Jewish population, in excess of 1,000, were killed. In Lithuania, we know that, for example, the Lithuanian population Jewish population was 220,000. 96.5% of them were killed. And Babyn Yar became a symbol, and we're going to talk about Babyn Yar because 33,771 Jews were killed in a period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, between the Jewish New Year and the Day of Atonement. They were killed in a very swift action, and that was the first action. And ironically, in Eastern Europe, where there was ghettoization in German-occupied former Soviet territories, ghettoization followed murder. It didn't precede murder. So the Jews who were ghettoized there understood very clearly that the Germans were killers and they wanted to destroy the Jewish community.
Thank you. And Mr. Maftsir, you, in your films, you have dealt with these memories of the Holocaust in the ex-USSR. But Babyn Yar, also you have a film about Babyn Yar itself and the road to Babyn Yar, and where it's clear that Babyn Yar has become a symbol. Why do you think it has become such a symbol?
No, it's very simple. First of all, about Babyn Yar, it was known starting 1941. In Jewish press, in international press, it was short period when Soviets allowed to distribute information about Jews killing in United States, about England and other countries. Secondly, in 1944, Ilya Eribuk wrote the poem about Babyn Yar. And later, other writers wrote about Babyn Yar. It was published. But mainly, what happened in 1961 in September, when in Literatурная Gazeta, very important Soviet newspaper, intellectual newspaper, was published a poem by Evgeny Yevtushenko, very known, very popular Soviet poet, Babyn Yar. It was in Moscow, in Central Press. Shortly after that, in another very important journal, Yunus, was published novel by Anatoly Kuznetsov called Babyn Yar. More or less at the same time, it was symphony written by Dmitry Shostakovich. Moskva, Leningrad. Shostakovich and Yevtushenko was very prominent Soviet persons. And what is very important from my opinion, nobody thought that if in Moscow it was published officially, it doesn't mean that Soviet rules don't recognize Holocaust, don't recognize Babyn Yar. On the contrary, it was symbol that now we can dealing with Holocaust memory in very central place, Babyn Yar. And another detail. If it was, let's say, the most Jewish city in Soviet Union, starting city in the war. It's not Baltic states, it's not Azerbaijan, it's not Bukhara. The three biggest cities, Kiev, Leningrad, Moscow. Many Jews in Moscow, many Jews in Leningrad, they are originally from Kiev. That means what happened in Babyn Yar, it was common personal memory for a lot of Jews. The combination of all those details transferred Babyn Yar to symbol. Paradoxically, very shortly, Soviets wanted to forbid everything. They tried, but it was too late. And since
Let me add
1961,
one thing to
it
Boris.
was open. Sorry?
I want to add one
And
thing to Boris. Let me say two sentences very quickly. The reason the Soviet Union allowed Babyn Yar to become known in 1941, shortly after it occurred, was the Soviet Union was trying to gain favor with the West, and consequently it felt that if it made the Jewish issue prominent in 1941, 42, and early 43, they would gain sympathy because the Soviet Union had changed its alliance. It had changed its relationship between being pro-German to being pro-English and pro-American. And they were anti-Semitic enough to believe that Jews had undue influence in America, and consequently they were interested in that. Later on, Soviet policy was to ignore the Jewish part of it and to regard these people as Soviet citizens. And consequently, the Evtushenko poem, which said there is no memorial at Babyn Yar and which spoke explicitly of the Jews, was explosive. Was explosive in the Soviet Union, which Boris will talk about. It was explosive in the West. I'm sorry I interrupted you, Boris.
Thank you, Michael. Boris, back to you, and Renee, I will be with you in a second. But Boris, can you please tell us about the cinematic, just the experience of using cinema and using your art as a way of exposing history, or, you know, building a historical narrative, and what you discovered during your filmographic work on Babyn Yar and other atrocities in the ex-Soviet Union?
Look, the cinematic style is, I think, this personal choice. I believe that Michael, in his production, know about it very well. And for me, it was four main questions. My story is where it happened, when it happened, how it happened, and with whom it happened. Because it's unknown Holocaust. My very important example was Shoah by Lanzmann. It's a classical film. But Lanzmann made his project during 12 years with real people. During the war times, they were age 20, 25, 30. My people, let's go. There was child, 10 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, is child's memory. It's very different. For me, it was choice. If I'm going to using archive material, and we don't have archive film material about Holocaust in Soviet Union territories. Totally, we have more or less 10 minutes film. All others from other places, that's mean illustration. What I'm doing by Lanzmann way, but according to my situation. That's mean only evidence. It was choice. I put it on my 12 hours cynical time. And, you know, now I put each day towards International Holocaust Day or evidence or some pieces from my films on Facebook. And, you know, I have reaction. It's really document. It's not complete document because, first of all, it's evidence. Second of all, I use music. I use all the situation around, but it was what I could do. And it's my best. Maybe otherwise anybody can do else, but you know, now it is too late. When I started, my youngest evidence, there was 85. Now there are more than 90. It's too late.
Renée, thank you for your patience. When you education about the Holocaust and education about such atrocities. So first of all, if I can ask you if these kind of films and documentaries and raising evidence, does that make it easier to educate about the Holocaust? And B, you in the United States, how much is the Holocaust being, how much is it evident in the school system or the education system whatsoever?
I think it's present, but we certainly have a lot of work to do. And it's my pleasure to serve on this panel with individuals who are experts on the story of what happened in Babyn Yar. That certainly is not my area of expertise, but when I think about my own experience and the atrocities that took place here in the United States, and the phrase as associated with the Holocaust, never again, that resonates with me. Resonates with me because of my own personal ancestral history. It resonates with me because of what I see happening here in the United States with immigrants. And so I think the Holocaust as a means to connect us and connect humanity so that atrocities for anyone, whoever they are, never happens again. And so I don't think it's taught enough in our schools. I don't think it's taught enough even in our university. My own university, at Ohio University, we do have courses on the Holocaust. But as I said, not near enough. I think fortunately, educators have an opportunity to play a pivotal role in ensuring we don't forget, that we don't forget the atrocities of the Holocaust and other atrocities to humanity. And when we teach about historical events like the Holocaust, we must teach, as my colleague said, what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and how to prevent it from happening again. So films like what our colleague has put together in documentaries, I know Steven Spielberg has even produced a documentary on Babyn Yar, that these are important opportunities for us to educate ourselves. Connecting the past with the present is not always easy, but it is imperative to be an active and informed citizen and to ensure that indeed this never happens again.
And do you find that American students connect to these stories? They find a point of connection and they actually do learn the lesson that needs to be learned, even though, you know, it's happened so far away, and as we speak more and more you know, in the past, we're more and more time is passing. So do you find that your students connect to these issues?
I think they do. I think we have to find ways to tell these stories. And so I think using opportunities like, you know, documentaries and the films and movies and study tours and panel discussions such as this, even Holocaust memorials and museums, personal narratives, that these have a way of resonating with students in a way where they can see how this connects to their present reality. You know, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the events that happened in the United States on January 6th, you know, with the insurrection to the citadel of our liberty, the Capitol in Washington, D.C. That activity, you could see individuals in the crowd, in the riot, who had shirts on that had 6 MWE. That tells you that these stories must continue to be told. You know, someone wearing a shirt where they're saying a 6 million was not enough. We have a lot of work to do. You know, there were individuals in the audience who had t-shirts about Camp Auschwitz.
Yes, thank you very much.
We have a lot of work to do, and that these are opportunities for us to educate young learners today so that tomorrow we don't have to be facing some of the same things that we have experienced in our past. That the past is still in many ways very much a part of our present, and if we don't tell these stories, we will never rid us of these past atrocities and current realities.
Definitely. Thank you, Renee. Professor Berenbaum, I want to ask you, you know, the extermination camps in Poland, especially Auschwitz, have become, you know, the primary and even sole symbols of the Holocaust. And these other horrific events, just like the Babyn Yar massacre and the Ponary massacre, and what you described earlier of just these private instances of shooting, all of this Holocaust of shooting, it hasn't got a very significant part or role or place in the memory discourse of the Holocaust, much less than the extermination camps, while it even perhaps maybe it shows a different way of cruelty and of dehumanization, just the fact that people were just shot, as you described earlier, even so close to each other.
Well, let me put it in a very particular context. The problems associated with what we call the Holocaust by bullets, which is these individualized murders, gave rise to the death camps. Let me put it to you very simply. If you want to know the evolution of the Holocaust, you have to say the following two sentences. At first, they sent mobile killers to stationary victims. That became problematic. Became problematic because it was too public. It was difficult for the killers, meaning that they had psychological breakdowns. They needed alcohol afterwards. They needed alcohol sometimes before and during. And then they reversed the process. What is reversing the process? You make the victims mobile and you send them to stationary killing centers. Stationary killing centers are modeled on the idea of Henry Ford, which is the assembly line. And the assembly line leads to the arrival of people at Auschwitz. They had selection. At Sobibor, Treblinka, and Belzec, there was no selection. Everyone was killed. Their property was confiscated. What was useful from the human being, including their hair and the gold from their teeth, was taken from them. They were then what the Nazis called exterminated, which is to be murdered by gas, and then their bodies were virtually cremated in order to leave no, quotation marks, evidence of the crime. That only occurred because of the weakness and the human difficulty of killing like this. Now, one of the problems is that, and this is where Boris's work is so important, one of the problems is that the evidence in the former Soviet Union was difficult to come by. The annihilation was virtually complete when Vasily Grossman and Ilya Ehrenberg came back. They noticed when they were covering the war, they noticed something incredible, which is they came to towns, villages, and hamlets, which they knew once contained massive numbers of Jews, and they were no more. And consequently, they tried to make that public in the Black Book. They took evidence and testimony. And for many years under the Soviet regime, this was downplayed and it was certainly de-Judaized. Let me say one more thing, which is we're getting a new ability to understand this history, because there is a project called Yachad B'Unam, which is a project established by Roman Catholic priest Father Patrick Dubois, who is going back to these villages, towns, and hamlets, and he's interviewing people who are now in their late 80s and early 90s. Remember, this occurred in 1941, so it occurred 79 years ago, 41, 42, 78, 79 years ago, 80 years ago. So if you were a 10-year-old observer, you're now 90. If you were a 20-year-old observer, you're now 100, which makes the difficulty of getting evidence. He's interviewing these people, but more importantly, he's also digging up some of these sites. When you dig up these sites, you get forensic evidence. You get, for example, a couple of things that are interesting. You find that the people had keys with them. Now, you don't ordinarily think of keys as evidence, but all of us carry keys. It means that when we left our home this morning and we locked the door, we expect to be able to come back to our home. When we parked our car and we went to work, we expect that our car will be there when we come back. It's a symbol of safety. When people went with keys, it tells you they didn't expect to die. They expected to return in health. Who did the shooting? Was it the SS? Was it the Wehrmacht? Was it the armies that were allied? Was it the local gendarmerie? Or was it the native guys coming out with their own shotguns, having bought ammunition in their own places? So we are now getting more attention to the Holocaust by bullets, but the final culmination point of the Holocaust was the factories of death and the assembly line. And we have a physicality to this that is much more difficult to come by in the killing fields. Let me say one more thing at the risk of speaking too much. When I was consulted by Rwanda, the government of Rwanda, on the question of how do you retain evidence and bury and close the mass graves, because they were worried in Rwanda that if they closed the mass graves, the evidence would be lost, and you would not understand what happened there. And part of what Boris is doing, part of what Father Dubois is doing, is to show us how we are able to what? How we're able to gain the evidence and remember the crime and remember its victims.
Boris, can you share, you know, most of your job, most of your work, most of your film has been focused on testimonies. And why, in your opinion, is testimonial evidence so strong? And maybe you can share shortly one of the testimonies that actually, you know, really spoke for you and did the job, as they say.
Look, I don't have specific vision about using this and those kind of documentary styles. For my project about Holocaust in Soviet Union territories, the main problem was that during more than 40 years, it was hidden Holocaust. Soviets did not recognize Holocaust in Soviet territory. They accepted total Holocaust in Poland, in Germany, in Europe, but not in Soviet Union. And during those years, there almost was no memorialization, documentation, no collected evidence. So when I started in 2013, what I have? No film materials, few, not long, stills, no possibility to make an organized story. My choice following Glansman evidence, it was choice because I did not have another choice. But when I choose this route, I go straight without any complication. About my evidence, you know, it's almost 100 places, different stories. 100 is less than 10% from all Soviet Union territories of killing, less than 10%. And I think that for me, I chose, I know your question, two places. The first one, Ekaterina Palace in Blank, one of the most important and popular tourist places in Petersburg and in Russia. On the front place, Ekaterina Palace, it was killing place of Jews in October 41. No signs, nobody, except few historians know about it. And another one, Lubavitch, Chabad. Everybody knows about Chabad. Who knows about village Lubavitch? This Chabad village. Almost 500 Jews was killed. It was Jewish village in November 41. So for you, I chose these two places. It's Russia, not Ukraine, not Latvia. I'm originally from Riga, not Belarus, Russia. Petersburg and Lubavitch. And for me, it was symbol of hidden Holocaust. I hope that I answered to your question.
Thank you very much. And Renée, last but not least.
And I want only one thing. Thank
Yes.
for Renée about meaning about 6 million. It's not enough. I think that for us, it's really remind in what situation we are now.
Thank you very much for that. Renée, last but not least, just one final question, because you were part of a Dean's program to the March of the Living that brought Deans of Educations to Poland to learn and see and feel the magnitude of the Holocaust. How did this experience affect you? How did that bring you or exemplify the magnitude and the importance of educating about the Holocaust, seeing, being on the ground? Was that important? How influential was that?
I think it was very influential. I know we're nearing the end of time. What I would say very briefly is that one of the things that it did for me was to connect me with the wider humanity and allowed me to once again be reminded about just how far hate will go if left unchecked. And these stories and these films, such as what my colleague has put together, helps us understand the destructive nature of hate and the dehumanization of other human beings. And so it taught me a lot and helped me be mindful of my role as an educator to make sure that we're educating for the future of our nation, our global world.
Thank you all. Thank you, Renée, and thank you, Professor Michael Berenbaum, and thank you, Renée Middleton, and thank you, Boris Maftsir, for really connecting. I got to say, this discussion really connected between the past, the present, and even left us perhaps a hope for the future. Thank you very much for joining us today.